Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Upenieks, the curatorial assistant at deCordova Sculpture Park and Museum, and I curated the exhibition What We Do in the Shadows. And I'm really pleased and happy to present this talk by artist and photographer Lou Jones. He has a really incredible past. His work has been featured in National Geographic, Time Life magazine, and many others. And he's also had exhibitions across the United States and produced a number of publications, and in particular one relating to the series of works On View and What We Do in the Shadows called Final Exposure. So now I'll pass it over to Lou, and we do have closed captioning, which you can turn on by clicking on CC Live Transcript at the bottom, and please submit any questions, comments, anything via the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll have some time to address those at the end. All right, thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can everybody hear me and everything? Is that okay? Am I muted or anything? Hello?
You're sounding good.
Okay, so, all right, I'm Lou Jones, and as Elizabeth mentioned, I am a commercial photographer. You are in the office of my studio. My studio is off to my left here. And we do all kinds of, I'm going to share screen here. I believe I can do this right. So that so that you're not seeing me, but you're seeing pictures for most of this. Can everybody see that? Elizabeth, can you see that?
Yep, it looks good.
Okay. As I mentioned, I'm a commercial photographer, so I'm going to sort of show you a little bit about what we do and evolve into. So this is the kind of work for advertising, design studios, magazines, etc., etc. And several years ago, for all kinds of artistic reasons, I decided that the commercial work needed to be in tandem with a completely different component of my career of photography. And so we started doing what we term, and have been doing a lot of talks about, long-term projects, how photographers can do long-term projects in tandem, as I said, with their, and so so I've been photographing tall ships for 30 years. Things like that. So I've sailed on board many, many tall ships and things like that. So, but one of the big projects that evolved out of the work I was getting from magazines and things was, I have photographed, and we call this a long-term project just because it is now, photographing the Olympics. So I photographed 13 different Olympic games. This was Rio. This is Rio. So that's a big project. Let me see if I can get back to, and more importantly, the one that's going on currently that we're doing, except for the pandemic that has prevented me from going for over a year, we've been photographing in Africa. We have the overly ambitious idea is to photograph all 54 countries in Africa, but with the eye of trying to do contemporary Africa, not relying on these sort of negative aspects that post-colonialism has foisted in our media, in Western media. We're trying to show what contemporary real Africa looks like. And here's the map. Here's where we have been, where we are going. To date, we have photographed in 14 different countries in Africa. And as I said, you can see here, you know, we're doing industry and education. We're doing food. Africa is quickly becoming one of the most incredibly big, having a big contribution to the food that we see all over the world. It's 54, it's not a monolith, it's 54 individual, unique countries with personalities, with languages and things like that. So now I'm going to go over here, back to, okay, there's one other project. These are the kinds of things that we have made into clients have invested in a lot of these long-term projects. And here is one in which we have been photographing, mostly in Boston, but not just, photographing the construction of enormously big buildings, tall skyscrapers, but using union workers, non-union workers, but we're photographing close up. Tomorrow morning, I will be at the top of a crane, 60 stories above the Boston, like you see here, photographing on that. But now I'm going to get back to the project at hand. Several years ago, realizing that just photographing for clients was not why I got into photography to start with, that I was interested in trying to be a little bit more relevant than that, to being able to do pictures that had a lasting component. And so, as I said, so I was photographing jazz. So I have an enormous 40 years of jazz musicians. I have 30 years of the Olympics. But I wanted to do something that was completely my own, non-derivative. And I had started with, so we did this project photographing men and women on death rows all over the United States. And it came from, after searching my brain for what I could do with my photography, how I could use photography to at least inform, to pick up projects that people were not, that were not dealing with well. I came upon, after almost 2 years of soul searching, an argument that I had had with my father when I, as close as I can think about, when I was 14 or 15 years old. And I realized it was about someone being executed in Washington, D.C., where I was born and raised. And I realized for the first time in my life, my short life, that my father could be wrong. To the day he died, he was in favor of the death penalty, and I separated from him in an argument. And then many years later, thinking about what kinds of projects I could get, this thing that had lived inside of me for all these years came to fore, and I realized that I needed to try. Now, it's impossible to photograph on death row. And people said, oh, you've got pictures. So absolutely, but it is really impossible to get onto death row. People photograph people who are in general population, but to be able to get onto death row is really, really an impossible issue. But we're going to talk a little bit about how we did that. Go to this first photograph. This was the first person, Willie Ote. He was in Lincoln, Nebraska. And we had worked for 2 years to get onto a death row. Everybody rejected, nobody would allow us on. And finally, Willie said yes. We got to the warden and we got onto death row. And I told the story in the book, both books that we've done about this issue, how I took a woman as an assistant. And when I got up in the morning in the motel and packed our equipment into the back of the rental car and drove to the prison in Lincoln, Nebraska, I claim I held my breath from the time I got up during the entire session And driving back till I got back to the motel later that day, I held my breath for the entire time. So I think I hold the world's record for holding breath. But anyway, I was allowed to go in and photograph Willie. He's been executed, as you see. And this was the first. And I hope that Mike Radulette, Mike, if you're there, please let everybody know through the chat or through the question and answer that you're there. Mike Radulette was essential. We were asking all the wrong questions. Nobody was talking to us at all when we were the prisoners, the wardens, the Department of Corrections, until Mike heard our story and allowed us, and through, I believe his wife had a relationship with Willie Otey, and we were able to photograph him. He had rejected many, many people. I'm going to go to another one, see where we go from here. Okay. So this is Marco Bay. Marco was a juvenile when he was given the death penalty the first time. And in review, they figured out that he had also killed somebody when he had just gotten old enough to be eligible for the death penalty and got a second death sentence. I believe that's correct. But I photographed this because I'm not very smart. Everybody that knows me knows I'm not very smart. So what happened was I was in prison. The first few people I was able to convince to go in, and I was so concentrating on trying to get great pictures and also engage them in a conversation. And so people know I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So it was such an incredible mental game in my head to be able to keep a really relevant conversation going, to not make mistakes. I was on death row. And being able to talk to people, I didn't feel that I had the latitude to be able to say stupid things. So I was concentrating very hard to make sure I was talking to them about things that were important. And they were telling me stories that were so compelling that I realized that I can't remember my own middle name half the time. So I was having this problem of figuring out, what do I need to do? So I realized I needed to tape record. So again, I had to wrestle with the problem, not being very smart. And I had a rep. I had a woman working for me at the time in my studio who was selling my wares, Lori Savell. And I hope Lori is also on the other end. And if you are, Lori, please let people know. Lori Savell, who was in favor of the death penalty at the time. I said, Lori, I sat her down. I said, Lori, I think I'm going to have to take you in, and you're going to have to engage in the conversations with these people. And this was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the first time Lori went in with me. And I'm going to talk about why I took Lori and other people like that in a minute. But she asked me, as we were, after they strip searched us and patted us down and looked through our equipment and all of that, she said to me, turned to me just as we were in the waiting room, what do I talk to him about? And I went, oh. And my anxiety level was so ramped up that I was just like, why are you asking me, to myself, why are you asking me at this late date? Anyway, we discussed right then and there. Just ask them what their story is. Don't interject your own. Ask them, which may sound like a very simple thing, but they have never been asked their story by the newspapers, by their lawyers, by anyone. So we made that a part of the whole project to ask their stories. And so she, from that moment on, was brilliant, brilliant, and just engaged all the people that she talked to during the rest of the project and got really, really great stuff. I'm going to go to another photograph. I'm probably holding them too long, but they all have stories. They all have amazing stories, I think. So now we have 3 or 4 people, and we start to say, I thought if I got 2 or 3, I would have a project. But as we realized that the issues were so complex and so individual, we knew that I realized I had to take this a little further. And so I had to find women. Women, there's so few, and it's such a unique situation. So this is Faye Foster, and you see how well dressed Faye is. We were able to smuggle in her childhood portraits. We were able to get that, and she was very, very savvy, had been on death row for a long time. And so you see how well made up she is. She had one of her friends, one of her prisoner friends, do her hair. She used Kool-Aid as cosmetics in order to give herself blush and eyeshadow. She used all kinds, and she had somebody bring in clothes just to be, so she was very, very, very cagey, but we were able to get, and Lori was able to engage her. So she's talking to Lori there. You see she's looking off, and I believe this was a really important portrait for Lori, an important session that she was able to relate to a woman who was on death row. It was very, very interesting to see that dynamic. Let's see where we go now. Oh, here we go. So now we have, as you see, I'm going down to probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you know, so anyway. People couldn't believe that we were getting onto death row and photographing, you know, the people we were engaging to try to help us, the lawyers, the advocates. But they said, oh, yes, okay, you got a few people, that's really cute, that's really nice, but you can't get onto Texas's death row. And so Lori and I then strategized how to get, Texas was at that time executing more people than the entire rest of the country per year. They were just one county in Texas was executing more people than the rest of the country was in a year. So we made that a priority, and it took us quite a while to get onto death row. But anyway, this is one of the people. This is Bobby West, and I put this up because Bobby was really, really iconic to Texas. We were able to photograph, and Lori, straighten me out if I'm wrong, I believe it was 7 or 8 people on death row on multiple trips. We went down more than once. And Bobby came in, walked into the room. You see he's smoking there. And you can't smoke in prison. You can't smoke in prison. And he walked in, and Doofus Jones sees him puffing on a cigarette as he's walking into this room that and you can see Lori's microphone. You see the little nib, the little black nib down in the lower right-hand corner. She's talking to him, engaging him in conversation, and he's calling her every name in the book. He's saying really foul things to him as he's smoking this cigarette. This is the first meeting that we had. And he walks into the room, he's smoking a cigarette, and Doofus Jones says, "Hey, you can't smoke in here. I thought it was illegal to smoke in here." One of the dumbest things I've ever said in my life. I'm on death row. This is his house. And he says, what are they going to do to me? But anyway, he sat down, he gave us an incredible interview. And Lori and him, even though they were contentious in this photograph, became very, till he was executed. They became pen pals. And so they talked back and forth. They became very, very, but he was struck by, how the hell did you get in here? I haven't seen my family, my lawyer. I haven't seen anybody but other prisoners since I got in here. How the hell? And Lori made sure that we not only got into these prisons, but we had contact visits with all 27 prisoners. So we were in the same room. And that was, I attribute that all to her efforts. She was brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Okay, where do we go from here? Oh, here. I'll tell you another little story. This is in Delaware. And this is a sort of like one of those silly stories I tell. And we worked on these two gentlemen who were in Delaware for a long, long time. And finally they said yes. And we got down there, flew down, got to this prison, and the entire neighborhood, there was a power failure. So the entire neighborhood was dark. There was no electricity. We were trying to get in, and I knew that they were going to say, no, you can't come in. But finally they let us in. And it was totally dark in the prison except for emergency lights. And they made us stand in this little room, and Lori and I and an assistant. So there were three of us. And they called me out of this room and led me down the hall and put me in this totally pitch black room. And I was like, why are they putting me in here? I'm standing in this room. I can't, who am I waiting for? And I finally, not smart Jones, realized, I bet you there's somebody else in this room. It was so dark. And so I went, uh-oh, I've got to, and Lori's the smart one. So she knew everybody's name and where they were from and what they'd done. And I was just a photographer. So I'm sitting there going, uh-oh, I can't remember his name. And so all of a sudden it flashed, and I was going to say, and then I realized, look at his last name. I had no idea how to pronounce it. Again, you only get one chance. So I realized I couldn't say his name because I didn't know how to pronounce it. I couldn't make that mistake. Anyway, I came up with the only brilliant thing that I've ever said in my life. I said, Jack? And he said, yeah. So there was somebody. He was there, standing there the whole time. He knew what. And I stuck my hand out in a pitch black room. My eyes had not been acclimated to the dark, and he reached out and grabbed my hand. And the rest that follows is something that took me a year to figure out. They were assuming putting me in that room. This is a year later that I figured out how horrible these people, the prison guards and everybody was. They put me in this dark room figuring that he was going to act out or I was going to make a mistake and they were going to just throw us out. When he and I got along so well, they walked by and they called Lori in and put her in the room, figuring that, and this is the dumb thing, another dumb thing I said, like we were having tea, I said, Lori, Jack, Lori, introducing on death row, like that was any kind of sane thing to do. Anyway, they realized that the three of us were getting along well. So they pulled me out. Now I'm leaving Lori and a convicted murderer in a pitch black room in prison. And I'm sure they did that on purpose in order to see it. And Lori handled herself so well. Anyway, we got very, very, very nice photographs, pictures. I was trying to see how photography, the universal language, could make a difference in a narrative that has been bandied about by politicians and clerics and just lawyers and judges and just normal people. And the narrative is so demented about how we are dealing with this major problem. This fellow here is walking around free. He's been exonerated. He was on death row for 21 years. He and I talked almost every morning for 2 years, and Lori finally figured out a way to get in after being rejected several times by Pennsylvania. And then I'm going to show you at least one more here. See if I can find this one. This is Mumia Abu Jamal. Some of you may have even, he's probably the most famous person on death. He's no longer, he's no longer on death row, but he was for years and years and years. He's probably the most famous. He has an amazing support system that has really worked very hard, but he had, because they worked so hard, he had open heart surgery last week, and apparently he's better, but he's in very bad health. But he's been on death row for many, many, many years in Pennsylvania. He was part of the Black Panthers and the movement in Philadelphia years ago, and they accused him. He claims he didn't do it, and that he's a political prisoner, but he is on death row. Let's see if I can. So I was trying to do the narrative of seeing if photography could make a difference. If people could hear the stories from multiple points of view as to what contributed to these people having that's what the project was all about. What could possess anyone to kill somebody else? Unwarranted murder was just, and so I said, my photography needs to deal with this. I need to bring this, and I think that if people can see the photographs of the people there being complicit with our government to execute people, if they could actually see the picture and look, and you're never going to be on death row, you're never going to meet these people, but through photography, I was hoping that people could, if they looked into these people's eye, they might change at least a little bit on the narrative. And I'm going to go to Elizabeth. How are we doing on time?
You're doing great. You can go for about 10, 15 more minutes, and then we can open it up to questions.
All right. I'm gonna jump over a couple just to show you how complicated this all became. Now, you see, people ask me, how did we choose the people we photographed? And I said, we were the end of the whip. We were not choosing. We were taking the people who would talk to us. And many people told us to go stick it where the sun don't shine. Talking to the press on death row gets you killed. I know that sounds very compelling, but very often these people are on death row for 10, 15, in the case of a few, over 20, before they were executed. So what happens that once the trial happened and you were your life was taken from you legally, you were many cases just forgotten. You were thrown into jail. You were put into. You were pulled away from general population. You were put onto death row, and people forgot about you. But if somebody brought the case up and said, "Hey, that person is still in prison. We convicted them years ago," it gets in the news, and then all of a sudden everybody's, why are they still on death row? We gave them the death penalty. Why haven't they been killed? And so they were by and large not very often interested in talking to the press, because it was something that really contributed to their death. But this was close to the end of the project. We went into Montana and we photographed these two brothers that were on death row for quite a while. And these were Vern and Lester Kills on top. They were Native Americans, and they were convicted with a couple of other people. I believe they're all off of death row now. They were able to, and this was an interesting situation. So we're trying to get all ages, both sexes. We have two women. So we were able to hear the stories of these women on death row. We were able to do almost in exactly the proportion that are on for races, including these Native Americans. And these two brothers, one of their defenses was the fact that they were Native American and that they did not recognize the ability for the majority governments, the majority populations of America to have jurisdiction over whether they were even applicable for going to trial. So that was one of the interesting defenses they had. But they got the death penalty, and then eventually they negotiated it down, both brothers. And this was a photograph. I put this up because, as I said, I believe all 27 were not only contact visits, but they were also without. This one, he has handcuffs on, but we were able to convince the guards to let us take him out in the hallway and photo it. So this is lit. We brought in, I will actually show you in a minute. But when he went out into the hallway, they made him, they put handcuffs back on him. They went around with handcuffs and leg shackles, but they put, and I lit this again with big Balcar strobes and all kinds of things. Anyway, this was a case where we approached a magazine to do we approached an editor to do a story on the project, and he stole the idea and he sold it to another magazine. And this was a photograph that the other photographer actually copied this picture for his, and it was a very, very complicated process and hurt me deeply, but, and so I'm going to go to one more. Okay, this is a case that we're going to show you the results of this. So this is Connecticut. Just last week I was discussing with somebody, and I said that I think less than 30 states still maintain the death penalty. We have been losing about one a year. So it's down to less than 30, I believe. And the person told me they thought that the death penalty was in every state, and that is in fact not the case. But this fellow was in Connecticut. So they had the death penalty when we took this picture, and they have gotten rid of the death penalty since then. So I guess that is somewhat of success as state by state. It's very expensive to maintain the death penalty. One of the arguments we talk about in the book is the fact that it probably is more expensive to execute someone. A lot of the people who are in favor say, hey, just kill them, get rid of them. But it costs so much more to execute people than it is to keep them in prison for, usually that is the case. And I hope Mike Rattolette will correct me if I'm wrong there. But he was in Connecticut, and we photographed, I believe, 3 people in Connecticut, and they no longer have the death penalty. But I'm going to show you, for those photographers out there, those artists out there. We're going to show you. So we maintain a fairly accurate, oh, I don't know why that did that. Anyway, it just, I think, okay, here we go. It's acting up. Anyway, these are photographs we included in the bottom of the website, the section of the website, to show you what it looked like. This is Connecticut on the left, and you see Lori down here. I hope Lori is chimed in by now. And this is me. And so we're bringing in, one of the things was that the prisons were really, really reticent for us to bring all this equipment in. So we brought in 2 1/4, 35 millimeter, black and white color, power packs, huge power packs, umbrellas, soft boxes, the whole thing. You can see this. You can see this soft box here. This is Texas. This is Bobby West, and here is Lori down here with her microphone, interviewing him, etc. So we're taking, and you can see that all the cord. Well, they were the biggest problem was getting in all the extension cords, and we had to carry enough extension cords to, I think, go halfway to the moon and back, because in the jail cells, in the common rooms, there were no outlets because they're dangerous. They can use them as weapons. They can take off the plates and go in and try to use electricity as a weapon. They can use it to kill themselves, to commit suicide. There's all kinds of negative connotations. So there's no outlets in the rooms. So that meant that we had to run our cords down the hall forever to get to a part of the jail where we could plug in this. Now we use speed lights and it's all battery operated. But in those days, we were using these big bell cars. So we ran cords for blocks down the hallways and everything. And then Lori went in early on and tape recorded somebody. And every time we would hit the shutter for the camera, it would surge and it would make a sound on the tape, and we would lose. And so the tapes were almost unusable because there was this click. So we had to run 2 cords. And not only that, but we had to run them to places where 2 different places so that we were not on the same grid. So they hated us bringing in all these cords. They figured somebody could shimmy down I don't know what they thought we were going to do with them, but ropes and cords and you know, the classic silly jailhouse where somebody shimmies down out of the prison on their sheets tied together. But anyway, getting that. But you can see all the cords that we're doing. But like, I'm throwing Polaroids on the floor and shooting black and white and color, and the whole project was done. As you see, they're square images. And we did not, this has been exhibited. Please go to the deCordova and see. Elizabeth has put up an enormously large body of this work at the deCordova, and it is really a lifelong project. And I learned a lot about, Lori taught me how persistent. She's so good. She was such a good salesperson, such a good person in our studio, such a good personality. She taught us so much about how to get work, but also she went into Texas to tell a terrible story about her. She went into Texas and the warden kept putting her off, and she just called. He'd say, call in a month, call in 6 weeks, whatever it was. And she would call to the day. And finally he said, oh, we never let anybody in. We don't let anybody in here. No, you can't come in. You can't. And she just was very persistent. And finally he said, oh, well, okay, you can come in, but you can come in on press day and you can shoot them through the little hole in the, you know, or whatever. And she said, that's not, and I heard her across the room. She said, that's not acceptable. And I was like, oh my God, what are you saying? She said, that's not acceptable. We photographed everybody face to face. And finally, the warden acquiesced, and we photographed, as I believe I said, 7 or 8 people. One of them was a woman. But she could convince anybody of anything. That was really amazing. And so hopefully there are questions. Elizabeth?
Thank you so much, Lou. Yes, please. I don't see any questions yet, but I have some ready for you, of course. But
okay.
Thank you for your really
motivational
talk. I'm not sure. Yeah, please stop sharing. But please, if anyone has any comments or questions, send them in via the chat or Q&A function. But some things I was curious about, you know, in the years since this project, I'm curious if your mindset has changed in regards to the death penalty, and especially in recent years with the resurgence of the abolition movement.
No, I was made by doing the project, and I think Lori was also had a big change of heart about the death penalty. But mine got to be, you know, I have less and less, I've become more and more radical and less enamored of our jurisprudence in this country. And so I don't have much faith in it. And the death penalty project just increased that. And we have done some research recently to find out, like I said, one of the people was exonerated and is after 21 years, and 2 people who have been executed, there is evidence now that has come to fruition since they've been executed, that there was a potential for them to be. So no, I have not changed, and even more radical. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to say Mike Radelet, I don't know how to say his last name. He is here, and he asked a question. Do you still respond with any of the prisoners?
Yes, we have kept in touch with, okay, one of the incredibly big problems. Now, Mike has been doing this for years and years and years. Mike really slapped our wrists many times and taught us really a lot of the right questions to ask and everything. And Mike has kept in touch. Yes, we have kept in touch, but one of the things that's really been really problematic, like one of the prisoners called me for every morning, every day. In those days, it was reverse the charges. My phone bill was astronomical for those 2 years. So he would talk. It was, you know, he couldn't pay for them himself, so he reversed the charges, and then we would talk for hours, before, during, and after. Not only that, but I was subpoenaed to testify in Texas at his retrial. It turned out right at the last minute, I didn't have to go. They had reconvicted him by the time that I was supposed to go down. But, and so, yes, but one of the negative things I have been trying to get to is that I believe at last count, 12 had been executed. So we have lost touch with those, of course, and have kept in touch with about 2 or 3 others. And Mumia being one of them, etc. And but he's almost a celebrity because of his case, trying to yes. But yes, we have kept in touch with a few.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And I'm sure, I mean, if you're one of the only people that they have outside contact with or had outside contact with for the first time, it's really a special relationship and connection that you forged with them. So
they have amazingly enough, the networks are pretty, as a matter of fact, the way we got to the second woman who was in Texas was because one of the prisoners, Bobby West, was a pen pal of her, and he told her that we were okay. Like I said, women, even though most prisoners wouldn't talk to the press, because of the consequences and other things, women talked even less. They were almost inaccessible. So it was very, very difficult. We talked to several, we wrote to, in those days, it was all by letter. We wrote to several and they told us they were not interested. Or one of them, actually one, said we could come in if we paid her. And I wasn't sure about the efficacy of that, so.
We do have another question. Someone is wondering, were you able to share this work with your father?
Ooh. I kept it secret. My father would have had a cow if he knew I was doing this. So I kept the secret. Not only that, but we kept it secret. Everybody in the studio had to sign non-disclosure. Everybody that processed film, everybody that transcribed, we kept it a better secret than D-Day. This was a top secret project. But my father, absolutely. So I never told my father or mother, because I knew my mother would tell my father. If my mother was also in favor of the death penalty, but I could talk to her easier and she wouldn't have gotten mad at me for it. But I screwed up big time. Once the project was over and we started to have exhibits, I sent out invitations and I mistakenly sent my aunt. I didn't send my father or mother, but I sent my aunt an invitation. And she said, "Are you going to the exhibit, Lou's exhibit?" And he said, "What exhibit?" He said, "Oh, he's doing the..." So I took a lot of heat on that one. But the next Christmas, the very next Christmas, these are a long story. I have no short stories. Because I had dedicated the book to my father, it's right in the front. I gave him a copy of the book. I think he probably picked it up once and it sat on his coffee table. So every Christmas and Thanksgiving, I would see it sitting right there on the top on the coffee table, until one day I went down and it wasn't there. I said, "Where's the book?" And he went, "Oh, I lent it to somebody." So I think he got it out of his house. So yes, we never discussed it. Didn't talk about it in one iota.
It seems, I don't know how you were able to keep that a secret, especially since the project was, so many years and so.
That's right.
It seems so intensive, just trying to get access and then also getting there and everything. So
I was worried that there was some convention of wardens somewhere in the Midwest or something, and hundreds of them would come and they'd be at the bar or something. "Oh yeah, I had this photographer come in the other day," and I go, "Oh, I had him come in last year. Oh," and then realize that there was this idiot running around the country photographing people on death row and them cutting me off. So but also we were worried about what other people might do with the issue, and so we kept it until almost the very end. It was top secret.
That's great. Yeah. And another question, which is something that I wanted to ask also, is did you get any heat from the public for trying to humanize these people?
Oh, I didn't bring that up, and Lori can chime in if she's there. We took infinite heat. It was constant. Why are you, from photographers? I had a photographer on a website that was a community website who called me every name in the book and said, "How can you photograph people on death row? That's out of the question. That's just beyond the pale." And I said, and I wrote back, the only thing I could think, I said, "Wait a minute, you photograph massacres, children being killed, people being shot, all kinds of things, and you're claiming that this is an issue that should not be photographed?" That's all I said. I didn't, but yes, we took, and we did on radio shows. We had a lot of radio shows that would have us as a guest, and we'd get people. The worst was, and the only sort of success I had was once I had the lecture at I was the featured speaker at a camera club, a big camera club convention. A lot of people, so they had a dinner and they had me as the featured. So I basically showed my work. I didn't show the death penalty, didn't, off the table. I realized it was just too inflammatory, but I showed the rest of my career. And I was at the head table and one of the guys said, hey, why, what kind of pictures? I said, I do all kinds of pictures and I do a lot of very provocative projects. That he said, well, what do you mean? I said, pregnancy. And then I said, and a bunch of other, he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I said, no, I don't want to talk about it. It's only going to create riff. And he said, no, I'll be cool. I said, the death penalty. He said, oh, why? And he just went up my butt and turned right. He just lambasted me. And he said, what? And then finally he gave me the typical question that everybody asks, everybody uses as well, what if this guy killed your mother or your sister? What if he did that? Wouldn't you want him to be killed? I said, yeah, I probably would want him to be killed, but that's not the question. The question is, what if that perpetrator, what if that murderer was your son? He apologized. I mean, the face on him, and you could tell that probably his son had been a big problem, maybe had been in jail, and all of a sudden he realized the love that he had for the son and the real complexity of this situation. But yes, we got lambasted all the time.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And yeah, just the simple flip of that question, instead of posing, if it's someone that you love got murdered, what if they were the murderer instead? It really is powerful. And then we have another question and comment. So, my understanding is that part of your interest in making this project was to make visible people who are largely unseen in our society. After you made the photographs, were the subjects able to see them? Did they have a response to the idea of being seen, or at least more visible?
Good one. Our restrictions were really, really very, very, in order to get in, there were all kinds of politics that went on. And then I had a dinner with a guy many years after I did the book, who was a TV guy, and he was trying to figure out how he could get in. We had NBC, we had PBS, we had all kinds of people asking us to get them into death row, calling Connie Chung, if anybody remembers that wonderful, but he took me to dinner in order to figure out, and he said he had gotten into a prison, hadn't been on death row, but he had gotten into prison, and the way he got in was to lie to the guy. And I said, that's a perfectly good journalistic way, but we needed to be a lot more circumspect about the consequences of what we were going to do, especially since it was such a huge project. So one of the things that we did was, once people sign releases, they sign releases, oh my God, the legalities in order to get them to say, okay, we're going to publish a book, we can use your words, just because this was so compelling. This gets people killed. So one of the things was we were able to get, I believe, all 27, and Lori may be able to chime in on that, people, we were able to mail or smuggle in all 27. We got the book. We got them the book.
Yes, I believe everybody got the book.
What's that?
I believe everybody did get the book.
Oh, is that Lori?
Yeah, I think Lori is joined on here.
Lori, are you there?
Oh, anyway. I am. I've been here for about 20 minutes.
What?
Nice speaking.
This is the amazing Lori Sabelle. Gorgeous. She's amazing. So everybody got the
I
book.
paid
We
him to
made
say
sure
that.
that everybody got the book. And we got, and this is one of the, I'll sort of throw in a little extra about getting the book to them, because we felt very compelled so that they could see what we write. And all the overriding comment from each of the persons that we were able to hear from after they got the book, and this was the majority, was that they liked the book a lot, except for their chapter. And at first I was hurt by that. And then I realized maybe we were a little more successful by the fact that, of course, they weren't going to like their chapter, but overall the book. So we got everybody. We even got a couple of, one of the University of Texas, one of the prisoners only let us in to photograph him if we would be sure to get his picture to his college, which was the University of Texas. And we were able to do that. And so we went beyond, yes.
Amazing. Yeah, we're just about out of time and I don't see any more questions. So,
okay.
Lou, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I think the issues of death row and the death penalty are ever relevant, increasingly so. And, you know, I encourage anyone to reach out to me and to come see the show.
Yes.
And also to look up Lou's book, Final Exposure, Portraits from Death Row, which is includes photographs from this project as well as interviews and stories with the inmates. So thank you, Lou, so much for your time. This talk has been recorded and will be online, hopefully by next week.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.